right, good evening, everybody. He is risen. Yes, he is, and he lives today. He lives in our hearts, he lives in our lives, and he lives forever, and he reigns over all. So we celebrate that today. What a great time of worship we've had together, and now we're going to look at the Word. We're in the book of Daniel. We're in Daniel chapter 3. We're going to continue on in this series, and I'll say a little bit about the resurrection of Jesus at the end, and we're also going to celebrate communion together at the end of the service tonight, celebrate the Lord's Supper. So I'm looking forward to that together. A couple of notes before we begin tonight. Some of you have asked about what is our church going to do in regards to Ukraine. Is there something we can do for our church body? And so the elders are looking into that. And Martin, having lived in Germany, or I guess you are a German, Martin and Frida, being German, have some connections through their part of the world, and so they're looking for, through those connections, to see if they can find a church that we might partner with and be able to support them during this time in the Ukraine. So that's one of the things that we're looking at right now as being a part of as a church. So please pray that God would open a path for us to be able to connect with somebody and support them well. Okay? Again, I want to add my comments to Martin's and just say, if you're here tonight and you didn't register for dinner, we always plan for enough, okay? It seems like you people don't like to register. So I don't know what to do about that. I'm not going to be your parent, so, it is what it is. We just kind of know how to plan the numbers. So I hope you'll stay for dinner with us tonight and be a part even if you didn't register. If you're a guest here tonight, if this is your first time or maybe the first time you've been back in a really long time, can I ask you if you wouldn't mind just to raise your hand so we could just welcome you tonight? We want to say a greeting. Okay, so here. In the very back, okay? I think back over here we have a new person, so we just welcome you tonight. We're so thankful that you came to join us at TIF, and we're very glad. And also back with us, back in a long time, is Amelia Clem. Amelia's back over here. A lot of you know Amelia. She's a Send missionary and has been on stateside for a while and just got out of quarantine and is back in the real world. So we're glad to see you, Amelia. Thankful to have you back with us. All right, Daniel chapter 3. This account is probably one of the most famous accounts in the whole Bible outside of the life of Jesus. The story of Shadrach, Meshach, Bendigo, and the fiery furnace. If you are a teacher, if you're a children's teacher, this is the story you want to teach. Like, this is the go-to story. Like, you want this story, okay? It teaches well. It's a great story. But listen, this is not just a story. This is history. This is a real account of God intervening in the lives of people to bring about his purposes. So we're going to read it that way tonight. All right, so we've already met the actors in this story, King Nebuchadnezzar, Shadrach, Meshach, and Bendigo. Shadrach, Meshach, and Bendigo, as we know from chapters 1 and 2, were some of the Hebrew young men who were brought out of Jerusalem and put into the King Nebuchadnezzar's training program, where he was going to indoctrinate them and give them the wisdom of the Babylonians. And they were going to become the new breed of Hebrews to kind of indoctrinate the rest of the Hebrew culture. And so they were young, they were fit, they were wise, and Daniel is their leader of these other three guys. They chose to stand up for God and not go along with all of the king's training program, but set themselves apart for God, and God blessed them, and as a result of that, they got put into positions of leadership early on. And so Shadrach, Meshach, and Bendigo are leaders in the region of Babylon. And God has put them into a position, a powerful position of speaking into the king's life. And so they're not just anybody. They're not just nobodies. They're somebodies. Okay? So now we come to this point where we're going to read today. I'm going to read the whole chapter, okay? It's a long chapter, but it's worth our attention, okay? Here we go. King Nebuchadnezzar made an image of gold, 90 feet high and 9 feet wide, and set it up on the plain of Dura in the province of Babylon. He then summoned the satraps, prefects, governors, advisors, treasurers, judges, magistrates, and all the other provincial officials to come to the dedication of the image he had set up. So the satraps, prefects, governors, advisors, treasurers, judges, magistrates, and all the other provincial officials assembled for the dedication of the image that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up, and they stood before it. Pause. Why did King Nebuchadnezzar build a 90-foot tall, 9-foot wide statue? Remember, he had had a dream. We learned that last week. King Nebuchadnezzar had a dream, and in the dream, we didn't really talk about this last week, but in the dream, he had a dream of a great image, a great statue that was made of several different kinds of metal and stone. And the purpose of the dream was to give him a picture of what was coming for his kingdom and the kingdoms after him. And the story, or the interpretation of the dream, was that his kingdom was actually going to come to an end. And Nebuchadnezzar, it seems like what is going on here is Nebuchadnezzar decides, I don't want my kingdom to come to an end. I prefer my kingdom to be around forever. And the top of the statue in the dream was made of gold, and it represented him. So Nebuchadnezzar decides, I'll just build an all-gold statue, and that'll represent my kingdom forever. And so that's what's happening at this moment. Verse 4. Then the herald loudly proclaimed, "This is what you are commanded to do, O peoples, nations, and men of every language. As soon as you hear the sound of the horn, flute, zither, lyre, harp, pipes, and all kinds of music, you must fall down and worship the image of gold that King Nebuchadnezzar has set up. Whoever does not fall down and worship will immediately be thrown into a blazing furnace." There's King Nebuchadnezzar again. Remember, he's a man of extremes. He doesn't do anything halfway. So it's not like, I'll just kill you. It's, I'm going to throw you into a blazing furnace. He's all the way, King Nebuchadnezzar is. Verse 8. At this time, Therefore, verse 7, as soon as they heard the sound of the horn, flute, zither, lyre, harp, and all kinds of music, all the peoples, nations, and men of every language fell down and worshipped the image of gold that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. So they played the music, everybody falls down, and they go on. However, verse 8, at this time some astrologers came forward and denounced the Jews. They said to King Nebuchadnezzar, "O king, live forever. You have issued a decree, O king, that everyone who hears the sound of the horn, flute, zither, lyre, harp, pipes, and all kinds of music," apparently it was very important to say all of those when you made the statement, "must fall down and worship the image of gold, and that whoever does not fall down and worship will be thrown into a blazing furnace. But there are some Jews whom you have set over the affairs of the province of Babylon, Shadrach, Meshach, and Bendigo, who pay no attention to you, O king. They neither serve your gods nor worship the image of gold you have set up." Furious with rage, Nebuchadnezzar summoned Shadrach, Meshach, and Bendigo. So these men were brought before the king. Now, just to pause again, there were a lot of people here. Remember, he has summoned people from all across his empire to participate in this ceremony. So there's a lot of people here. So he probably didn't notice that Shadrach, Meshach, and Bendigo, perhaps they had decided to position themselves toward the back of the crowd and try to be unobtrusive about their act of disobedience. I don't know. So they were summoned now to appear before him. Verse 14, Nebuchadnezzar said to them, "Is it true, Shadrach, Meshach, and Bendigo, that you do not serve my gods or worship the image of gold I have set up?" So you see, it was not just a matter of performing the simple act of obedience. Nebuchadnezzar equated this act with worship. You do not serve my gods or worship the image of gold I have set up. Verse 15, now, when you hear the sound of the horn, flute, zither, lyre, harp, pipes, and all kinds of music, if you are ready to fall down and worship the image I made, very good. But if you do not worship it, you will be thrown immediately into a blazing furnace. Then what God will be able to rescue you from my hand? Nebuchadnezzar, this image, it is not the worship of the image that's going on. It is the worship of Nebuchadnezzar. You see, Nebuchadnezzar has built an image of himself. Nebuchadnezzar does not want worship of the image. Nebuchadnezzar wants worship of himself. What God will save you from my hand? Verse 16. Shadrach, Meshach, and Bendigo replied to the king, O Nebuchadnezzar, we do not need to defend ourselves before you in this matter. If we are thrown into the blazing furnace, the God we serve is able to save us from it, and he will rescue us from your hand, O king. But even if he does not, we want you to know, O king, that we will not serve your gods or worship the image of gold you have set up. Then Nebuchadnezzar was furious with Shadrach, Meshach, and Bendigo, and his attitude toward them changed. He ordered the furnace heated 7 times hotter than usual, and commanded some of the strongest soldiers in his army to tie up Shadrach, Meshach, and Bendigo, and throw them into the blazing furnace. So these men, wearing their robes, trousers, turbans, and other clothes, were bound and thrown into the blazing furnace. The king's command was so urgent and the furnace so hot that the flames of the fire killed the soldiers who took up Shadrach, Meshach, and Bendigo. And these 3 men, firmly tied, fell into the blazing furnace. Then King Nebuchadnezzar leaped to his feet in amazement and asked his advisors, weren't there 3 men that we tied up and threw into the fire? They replied, certainly, O king. He said, look, I see 4 men walking around in the fire, unbound and unharmed, and the 4th looks like a son of the gods. Nebuchadnezzar then approached the opening of the blazing furnace and shouted, Shadrach, Meshach, and Bendigo, servants of the Most High God, come out, come here. So Shadrach, Meshach, and Bendigo came out of the fire, and the satraps, prefects, governors, and royal advisors crowded around them. They saw that the fire had not harmed their bodies, nor was a hair of their heads singed. Their robes were not scorched, and there was no smell of fire on them. Then Nebuchadnezzar said, praise be to the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Bendigo, who has sent his angel and rescued his servants. They trusted in him and defied the king's command and were willing to give up their lives rather than serve or worship any god except their own God. Therefore, I decree that the people of any nation or language who say anything against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Bendigo be cut into pieces and their houses be turned into piles of rubble, for no other God can save in this way. Then the king promoted Shadrach, Meshach, and Bendigo in the province of Babylon. This is God's holy word. What a great, encouraging message, is it not? I could stop right there and we'd be okay, but I won't. Well, in spite of Nebuchadnezzar's recognition of God at the end of chapter 2, Nebuchadnezzar, if you remember at the end of chapter 2, recognizes Daniel's God. After he interprets the dream, he says, oh, your God is so great, so wonderful, so powerful, he can interpret dreams. He's still unmoved in his religious beliefs. You see, you can acknowledge God and not believe in him. And plenty of people do that today. Maybe that's you today. Maybe you're here today. You acknowledge God, but you really don't believe in him. And today I want to challenge you to consider believing in him and putting your faith and trust in him like Shadrach, Meshach, and Bendigo did. They put their faith and their trust in the God of the Bible. Well, Nebuchadnezzar is firmly still seated on the throne of his life and the throne of Babylon. So he builds this statue to counter the dream that he's had, as I've already mentioned, one made of gold from top to bottom. And he calls for representatives from throughout the kingdom who speak all different kinds of languages. His kingdom is rather large, and so he brings all these people together to come and be present for its dedication. By the way, this was done at almost the similar place as the Tower of Babel. He's trying to recreate an empire that will encompass the world. So everyone is called together and told to fall down and worship at the sound of these instruments, and this would be a sign of their loyalty and worship of Nebuchadnezzar. However, Shadrach, Meshach, and Bendigo would not. They could not obey the king's command without violating the first and second commandments explicitly of the 10 Commandments. They would not bow down. And so he's furious with rage. In the original language, it actually talks about how his face is twisted up and deformed because he's so angry. What God will be able to rescue you from my hand? Listen, when the world is going in one direction, when the world bows down to an idol and you stand up, don't be surprised at the anger that comes about. Don't be surprised at the anger that comes about in response to that. So tonight, I just want to give you 3 ideas to think about. 3 ideas to think about. The first one is this, and they're all related to this idea: stand up. And that's why Avery had you talk about this in your groups, about a situation where you had to stand up for the truth, or stand up for yourself, or stand up for God. And I hope that there were lots of stories like that around the room. And if you haven't had one yet, maybe you will in the future. And so tonight I want to give you maybe a little training or a little encouragement for that moment when it comes. Stand up for God. You know, many of us fail in the Christian life because we're not willing to pay even the smallest price. We don't want to lose our popularity. We don't want to lose, we don't want to be ridiculed. We don't want to be lonely. We don't want to experience economic hardship. So we are just unwilling to do anything, to risk anything for the Lord, for standing up for the truth. These 3 men, Shadrach, Meshach, and Bendigo, made a difference because they were willing to stand up even at the cost of their lives. What should we stand up for? What should you stand up for? Some people choose to stand up for everything. You know somebody like that? Somebody who stands up for everything? My wife would say that I sometimes stand up for the wrong things. And she's right. Sometimes I get on a little kick about things that I shouldn't get on a kick about. And so that's why God gave her to me, to say, Todd, calm down. And honey, I just want to acknowledge I appreciate you for that. I hope I'm always this gracious to you when you tell me that I should calm down. But what should we stand up for? Listen, there's really just a couple of things we should stand up for. We should stand up for the holiness of God. We should stand up for the holiness of God. We should stand up for the gospel. We should stand up for righteousness. What we don't stand up for is personal preferences. Okay? What we don't stand up for is personal preferences, and I'll share with you a story about my personal preference stand-up. When we, early in our years here in Taiwan, my family was over in the Shituan district. We were driving to go to the immigration agency to do something, I think. And we drove past that McDonald's that early on there weren't a lot of Western-style McDonald's. Single floor, play space. It just looked like a Western McDonald's. And so we drove past that one, and it's the one near Banner Church. And I drove past that, and I was like, that just looks like home. We should go in there. And it was hot outside, and I said, we're going to go in there and we're going to have a Coke float. And everybody was, y'all were all excited about that. I'm pretty sure y'all were excited about that. Y'all were excited about that. Everybody was happy about a Coke float. And so we go in there, and I was pretty proud of my limited Chinese ability at that time. So I marched up to the counter, and I will take 5 Coke floats. And the girl stood there, and she looked at her register, and she said, no Coke float, no button. And I said, I was going to get a Coke float that day. I said, no button, no problem. No problem. You don't need a button. She said, no problem. No button. And I said, no, not a problem, not a problem. I said, you see, do you have ice cream? Yes. Do you have Coke? Yes. I said, do you have a cup? Yes. I said, then we have Coke float. I said, you press any button. I don't care which button you press. That button becomes Coke float, and I will pay the price. No button. I said, can I speak to the manager? I was going to get my Coke float. So the manager came over. What's the problem? I said, no problem. No problem. I just want a Coke float. She said, we don't have a button for that. And I said, but you have ice cream, you have Coke, you have cups. I said, I'll pay whatever price you want me to pay. I just want Coke floats for my family. We can't do that, sir. I said, well, then give me 5 ice cream cones and 5 cups of Coke. So we got our 5 ice cream cones. We got our 5 cups of Coke. We marched right over to the table in front of the counter. Thank you. And I proceeded to dump my ice cream into the Coke. And as you know, when you put ice cream into Coke, it fizzes. And it fizzed all over the table. So I never went back to that McDonald's. Don't stand up for your personal preferences, okay? Don't stand up for traditions. Don't stand up for traditions. Don't stand up for, we've always done it that way, okay? Listen, Shadrach, Meshach, and Bendigo stood up for God because he's righteous, because he's holy. Stand up for those things. Shadrach, Meshach, and Bendigo replied to the king, O Nebuchadnezzar, we do not need to defend ourselves before you in this matter. If we are thrown into the blazing furnace, the God we serve is able to save us from it, and he will rescue us from your hand, O king. But even if he does not, we want you to know, O king, that we will not serve your gods or worship the image of gold you have set up. Do you have the courage to stand up for God? Actually, you don't need courage. You need faith. You need faith. Shadrach, Meshach, and Bendigo told Nebuchadnezzar that they would stand with God regardless of the outcome. Salvation or no salvation, they were with God. Their faith was secure. Which brings us to the second idea. Stand firm with God. Stand firm with God. They weren't obedient based on the outcome. They were obedient based on their faith. They didn't base their decision on whether or not God was going to save them. They based their decision on God. Listen, ultimately, our faith must rest in the character of God, irrespective of what he does or does not do. 1 Peter 4:12 and 13 says this, Dear friends, do not be surprised at the painful trial you are suffering, as though something strange is happening to you. but rejoice that you participate in the sufferings of Christ, so that you may be overjoyed when his glory is revealed. Listen to what Peter is saying. Dear friends, do not be surprised at the painful trial you are suffering. Don't be surprised. Some of us act all surprised when trials come into our life. Don't be surprised, Peter says. This is normal. The normal life for the Christian is perhaps some pain and suffering. For others, it's a lot of pain and suffering. For some people, it's a little pain and suffering. But the normal life, Peter says, for the Christian is some pain and suffering. But he says this, rejoice that you participate in the sufferings of Christ, so that you may be overjoyed when his glory is revealed. God's glory gets revealed through the suffering. God's glory gets revealed through the suffering. No suffering, no glory. If you're not willing to experience any pain or suffering, then you also refuse to experience God's glory. If we serve God faithfully, then it is really possible that trials and fiery ordeals will come. That's not strange, Peter says. But we must remember, as these three men obviously did, that it's better to accept the narrow way, which leads to eternal gain, than it is to follow the way of the world, which will lead to eternal loss. Okay, last point. Stand in the furnace. Stand in the furnace. Sometimes God saves us from the furnace, but other times he only saves us in the furnace. Let that sink in for just a second. He saves us only in the furnace. It's only when you go in that God's presence is revealed, that his salvation comes. Shadrach, Meshach, and Bendigo, if they had not been thrown into the furnace, they would have never experienced the incredible miracle of the presence of Jesus coming to save them. And the glory of the Lord would not have been revealed to Nebuchadnezzar and all those people. It seems like for most Christians, and frankly, not just for Christians, but for people in general today, our primary goal is furnace avoidance. We don't even want any heat on our feet. We want to stay as far away from that kind of life as we possibly can. So we pray, God, deliver me from pains, discomfort, suffering, inconvenience. Make my life smooth. Make my life easy, comfortable, pleasant. Remove all obstacles. We want to avoid low-level flames at all costs, let alone the real flames. But it is in those times when we will experience the closeness and presence of the Lord most intensely. And at the same time, the world will see the display of God's glory most brilliantly. If Shadrach, Meshach, and Bendigo had not stood up for God and stood with God, then God would not have had the opportunity to stand with them. And that's exactly what he did. God stood with them in their fiery trial and rescued them out of the furnace for his glory and their good. Can you just, as I was reading that account, can you put yourself into that moment? Shadrach, Meshach, and Bendigo in their robes, with their turban, with their scarves, with whatever they were wearing on their feet, their sandals. And King Nebuchadnezzar says, there's this furnace which had been used, obviously, to build the great statue. So now it's been heated 7 times hotter. I'm not sure how they measured temperature back then, but it was hot, okay? It was hot. And Nebuchadnezzar says, bind them up. Bring the strongest men from the army and bind them up. So already they're being bound by these terribly strong guys. And then he says, throw them in. And so they're being picked up and carried towards the entrance to the furnace. And as that's happening, the men carrying them are dying because they cannot survive the heat. But they don't feel anything. What's going through their minds? Shouldn't it be getting hotter? Shouldn't we be broiling alive? And yet, I'm okay. And then as they fell into the furnace, someone was there. Someone was there to catch them, to receive them. And they were safe. The only thing that was burned off of them were the bonds. It says not even a hair was singed. The awesome power of the Lord. Unimaginable. And Nebuchadnezzar knew it. Nebuchadnezzar knew it. Dear friends, it's Easter Sunday. It's the day we celebrate the resurrection of the Lord Jesus from the dead. The day we Christians celebrate being saved from the fiery furnace of God's wrath. And listen, God's wrath is something much greater than Nebuchadnezzar's furnace. It's a cosmic fire to burn up the sin of the world. We are like Shadrach, Meshach, and Bendigo, bound up by sin. When God's wrath was poured out on Calvary, it was we who deserved to face it. But Jesus stood in our place. Someone stepped into the fire on our behalf, the Lord Jesus Christ. And the only thing that was burned away from us was the bond of our sin. Because of his perfect life, he was able to be our substitute. And because he is the Son of God, he was able to bear the wrath of God against our sin completely. That's the message of Easter. Jesus, the perfect Son of God, offering himself as the substitute for sinners on the cross, accepting the wrath of God in our place so that we can know and accept the love of God instead. And we know this message is true because of what happened on Easter. Jesus rose from the dead on Easter morning, his sacrifice fully accepted by God. The payment for sins is finished, and now all of us who believe in him and trust in him are saved. And you, my friend, if you're here tonight and you've never believed and trusted in him, you can be saved tonight by putting your faith and trust in him. You can be saved. We're going to share communion together in just a moment. If I could ask the ushers who've agreed to serve, if you would come to the front, please. Jesus shared this meal with his disciples before he went to the cross as a reminder to them so they would continue to practice this. And just as we're doing today, down through the last 2,000 years, the church has celebrated this meal over and over and over again as a way to remind ourselves of what happened on the cross. As you take the bread, as you take the cup, there's both visual and tactile things that you should experience. Visually, it's the blood of Christ shed for you, the red juice. So as you hold that cup in your hand and meditate, remember. That's what we're supposed to do. Jesus said, do this in remembrance of me. You remember Jesus' blood shed for you on the cross. And the bread is his body given for you. Given for you. As you put that bread into your mouth, the reason Jesus uses unleavened bread, crunchy bread, is so as you crunch it in your mouth, it's the breaking of his body for you. His body broken for you, crushed under the punishment of God's wrath on your behalf. So you remember those things. You meditate on them. And it causes our love for Jesus to grow.